My first question is regarding the military command to the Tigray Armed Forces say that the Ethiopian National Defense Forces have attacked elements of the Tigrayan forces in the direction of the David northern western Tigray. What are the prospects of the negotiation process and the stance of the government of Tigray after this incident? And I also have a question regarding the African Unit recent briefing. What do you think of the recommendation to invite the state of Eritrea to help bring about negotiated end to the conflict? And also, Obasanjo has also urged both parties to negotiate without any precondition. Why do they regard restoration of basic services and withdrawal of invading forces from Tigray as precondition that may impede the peace process? And during their visit to Mekelle a couple of weeks ago, the special envoys to the AU, the US and the UN reaffirmed that the restoration of basic services in Tigray was a matter of negotiation, saying that continued failure to resume services wasn't acceptable, despite repeated incoherent statements. The Ethiopian government has failed to do so. What does the international community should take to compel the Ethiopian government to listen to the Checkhold on Tigray? Saturday marks the 10th anniversary of the passing of the late Prime Minister. And if you want to share your reflections on the legacy of your party's former chairperson.
What concerns does the government of Tigray have with respect to International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia? Have you seen any evidence so far that this commission's work will be marked improvement to the joint investigation by the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission? And the second question is the briefing notes released by the AU Peace and Security Council following Mr. Obasanjo's briefing suggested that some sorts of diplomatic breakthrough on the conflict between Tigray and the Abiy regime was around the corner. What's the source of the optimism? Do you share that optimism? If not, why did the Council make this particular claim? Thank you.
The government of Tigray has released over 4,000 prisoners of war in accordance with the promise made to Mr. Obasanjo following his pleas for confidence-building measures. But the Abiy regime didn't take any reciprocal measures to show its goodwill. If the AU didn't press the regime to do its part, do you have the confidence that they will be firm with the regime on more complex issues that might arise during negotiations?
With regard to the statement by the military command of Tigray Army Military Command, it was alluded to an incident that took place on the 15th of August, and the statement was made on the 17th of August. And one has to take note of the time lapse between the time the incident took place and the statement, the time the statement was put out by the military command, because it has serious implications on what it means for us to be really serious about peace and the cessation of hostilities, no matter how shaky it was. Since the launch of the unilateral, bilateral, whatever cessation of hostilities back in March, there has been a lull in violence. We have been doing everything in our power to avoid the resumption of hostilities. There have been provocations here and there, especially in areas where Amhara special forces and Fano ragtag militias are particularly active. It's mostly done probably to provoke the so-called national defense forces into action and to engagement with us. So the fact that the unilateral ceasefire was mediated by the Americans, and of course one of the arrangements we made was for the Chief of Staff of the National Defense Forces and for the commander of our forces to have a more or less regular contact on a number of issues. So they have been engaged a couple times where there were indications of some provocations, and we have so far managed to to prevent minor provocations from escalating. So it was something of a surprise when, on the 15th of August, our lines of defense were caught under heavy shelling, which continued for about an hour, if not more, if not longer. And the first reaction by the local commanders of the Tigrayan Defense Forces was that perhaps this was a freak incident. You know, it's not entirely uncommon for an Amhara colonel or something acting in the heat of the moment. If, for example, Amhara Special Forces are engaged in some kind of battle cry, impromptu battle cry, which they often do, and they would start shelling positions. This happened in Raya. We were able to respond resolutely to the Amhara contingent. The defense forces contingent was repulsed as well, but we were able to bury the hashed right there and then. But this time around, what we thought was maybe it was an isolated incident where some rogue, off-grid officer was I don't know, doing something that was quite out of ordinary. But it turned out that's why it took us 2 days. So we have a number of channels of communications, and it was clear that it was not a freak incident. It was an orchestrated provocation that was deliberated upon, ordered and carried out with the knowledge and clear instruction of higher up in the Defense Ministry, all the way through to the line officers who executed the plan. So it was obvious they were sending a statement. Hence our decision to put out a statement. And it obviously, these people are telling us that they don't have much appetite left for the unilateral cessation of hostilities that has been in place for quite some time now. That's why we had to come out with a statement and express our dismay that these people are not really serious about peace. What sort of course of action will follow? Let's cross the bridge when we come to it. But it has become abundantly clear that despite waxing lyrical about peace, the authorities in Addis Ababa are not really serious about peace. Not only that, they are not really serious about peace. In fact, they are gagging for the resumption of hostilities. That's what has become abundantly clear. What are we going to do after this? I don't want to dwell much on this topic. The cessation of hostilities was meant to serve some purpose, at the very least humanitarian access issues. And there were a number of issues that were being discussed back and forth by people who were working on as mediators, different interlocutors who were involved throughout the process. So the first order of business is for us to come out in public and complain that this has happened. And if indeed there has been people who had illusions that the people in Addis were perhaps suing for peace, this is it. It has become obvious that they are anything but interested in peace. That's the first order of business. Second, we expect the international community to put the right pressure on the regime in Addis. What we are seeing is the unraveling of a temporary cessation of hostilities, the consequence of which is going to have a far-reaching, it's going to be very far-reaching as far as the stability not only of the country but also the entire region is concerned. So we want to call the international community's attention to the gravity of the situation that is likely to unfold as a result of such a provocation. As to what course of action we're going to take, I don't think that's necessary. We'll still use every infinitesimal opportunity for peace, because peace is in our strategic interest. If, for example, the international community somehow prevails upon the Abiy administration and to get it to undo the consequence of the propagation, however they do it, it's beyond me to say. But if the international community, for example, it keeps telling us seized with this matter, and if it can prevail upon the Addis regime and to bring them back to their senses and to get them to sue for peace again and sincerely, then why not? We might very well do everything in our part to take advantage of such an opening. But I personally fail to see if there is going to be such an opening in the first place. But we're still loyal to our commitment to peace. So we'll see what will come out of our statement and what the international community would say by way of response. But as far as we're concerned, technically, the cessation of hostilities has been breached. And of course, it's going to be open season for all of us as far as negotiations is concerned. But we have been consistent throughout, and will still remain consistent, that our priority is peace, our priority is negotiations, but as they say, it takes two to tango. It's not, I mean, only because we are interested in peace doesn't mean peace will prevail, because it requires the other party to subscribe to peace. You know, we don't have anything personal against President Obasanjo, by the way. In fact, we like him. I mean, we enjoyed his presence here. He raised a number of issues. He came here about 7 times. There are things we feel strongly about. There are things he feels strongly about. There are things which we believed he had difficulty understanding. For example, the issue of Western Tigray. It was obvious he was reading from Abiy's talking point. But we tried to dissuade him from that position. We tried to show him that the reason why we believe the Constitution matters is because it has introduced a different layer of understanding to the complexity of Ethiopian politics. I'm not sure how far we have succeeded in getting our message across, but the whole point is whatever we have against his mediation has nothing to do with any visceral, knee-jerk personal reaction to Chief Obasanjo as a person. No, nothing. We would have loved for him to play a positive role, but we realized that it was, he didn't have a roadmap as far as we're concerned. In fact, as you mentioned earlier, one of the questions he raised was whether we were ready to undertake some confidence-building measures, one of which was the release of prisoners of war. He asked us if we were ready to release about 1,000. We said we can release twice as many, because we had about 10 times as many. So we said, okay. And in fact, I'm not going to be harsh on them. The ICRC were also grudgingly involved in the process, but they wanted to do business with the Abiy government, and they didn't want to rub the Abiy government the wrong way. So we understand their feet dragging on the issue, but at least Mr. Obasanjo promised he would be here for the photo opportunity when we release the prisoners of war. But it turned out the guy who promised to him he could go ahead with the confidence-building measures, none other than the Prosperity Prime Minister bailed out on him, and he told him he didn't recognize any prisoners of war in Tigray. So Mr. Obasanjo didn't even show up. We had to release them anyway because we had already promised the prisoners. The most unfortunate thing about the release of prisoners is they were consigned to a concentration camp in Afar immediately after they crossed the border, the line of control, the ENF line of control. So I'm not blaming Mr. Obasanjo for their plight in Afar, but I could make a very strong case that if it wasn't for his involvement, these people would have been here in Magala. Whether that is a blessing or a curse, I cannot really say. So when we recently heard he was entertaining the idea of unconditional talks, who would be opposed to unconditional talks, except that we are being asked to talk under preconditions where our people will have their hands tied, the chokehold on our people will be maintained, and so I will definitely be joining the negotiations somewhere on a stretcher or something, or on ice. I mean, that kind of stuff obviously is lost on them. I would have thought this was the easiest thing to understand. The people of Tigray have lived under an absolute blockade for nearly 700 days now. And to get Tigrayan government people to accept an unconditional, quote-unquote, dialogue in which their people's hands are tied, millions of their people are under extreme chokehold, that will be the height of irresponsibility. That, whether it comes from Obasanjo or from Antonio Guterres, or even if Debrazyon would say this, I would say this is going to be the height of irresponsibility, except that Debrazyon's position is clear, that if we are going to do this, we have to do it in a manner that betrays confidence. As she pointed out, if I cannot trust Mr. Obasanjo's mission with the release of prisoners of war, why would I trust that mission with the fate of the people of Tigray, with the fate of Western Tigray, for example? It's just as clear as that. And to add insult to injury, the briefing note clearly called on the Republic of Eritrea to join peaceful negotiations. I don't know in what capacity the Eritreans will join. Are they going to join as surrogate parents of the prosperity government? Are they going to join as the benefactors of this regime? Or are they going to join as the genociders that they really are? It is becoming obvious. Some in the EU circles have little or no clue about the ordinary notions of fair play and justice. To invite a government that has made killing and destruction its vocation, and a government that has flaunted its readiness to wreak havoc in Ethiopia unless it gets its way, it's allowed to get its way, to invite this body to be part of a peace process in Ethiopia. That, if that is not the height of irresponsibility, nothing is. But then again, I'm not responding in official capacity. You just brought it up, but I saw it flying around on media. I have my own opinion, but as far as the Tigray government is concerned, it's beneath our pay grade as far as we're concerned. What we say is we would not be part of such an abomination, no matter how beautifully it is couched. And the most outrageous part of it is it doesn't even acknowledge the kind of crimes these people have committed. It still has yet to come to terms with the fact that it is AU Commission itself that christened Abiy's genocidal campaign, Eritrea's genocidal campaign, as a law enforcement campaign. So much for the AU circus. With regard to special envoys, it was clear, their statement was clear, that services are non-negotiable. It would require abdication of responsibility on our part, on their part, equally importantly, to backtrack on their statement. They have made it clear. Would have liked for them to say things that we would like them to say on Western Tigray, for example, on Eritrea, for example. They didn't. So they are entitled to their own judgment on that area. We believe they understand our position, but they were not willing to broach the subject for whatever reasons they deem important. But on humanitarian access, on independent investigation, on the restoration of services, they were very clear. They could not have pronounced themselves more clearly on the subject. They said these are non-negotiable and those services need to be swiftly restored. Voila. And now, the very government that told them was ready for peace, and that, in fact, gave them assurances that it would honor its promise as long as they could secure a piece of paper from us guaranteeing the safety and security of technicians who would come here and open banks, preposterous as it may sound, is now telling them, yes, it is ready to open services, it's ready to resume services because it cares a lot about the people of Tigray, but still makes it conditional on first sitting on a negotiating table. To the extent that there is a precondition in this process, it is this precondition being pushed by the Abiy government that we can only join negotiations with our hands tied. What the reaction of the envoys is going to be, the jury is still out. We still expect a response, formal response from them. But as you have rightly pointed out, I have heard it over the news that the so-called peace committee is coming up with something which obviously is a publicity stunt to steal the show, because clearly the ball is in the courts of the Abiy government. What they originally promised to the envoys, they failed to honor because they didn't think we would accept their demands for a written guarantee or something. Now that we have called their bluff, the only way they tried to send Mr. Obasanjo to Ma'ala. And we said, no, what's the point of bringing in Mr. Obasanjo to Ma'ala? Because the envoys have already secured our guarantee, and then we would expect them to inform us of whatever response the government in Addis Ababa has made. So we said, no, there is no point for us to entertain other channels when the first channel has yet to yield some results. Obviously, it hasn't. Now, the so-called peace committee has come up with something. It's not a novelty. They are just regurgitating the same thing, except that they are trying to introduce some bureaucratic elements as to what they are trying to do, which is doing nothing. And it's very unfortunate. I don't know what the international community would respond to this. And to have the people, the leadership in Tigray, to subscribe to such a circus, that would be injustice. But will not be part of that kind of injustice. But as far as we're concerned, the envoys, I would say, it behooves them to come out in public and call the government out on its intransigence. on its poorly written dramas. With regard to the International Commission of Experts, there is little in the way of market development. But President Debretsion did hold discussions with three of the leaders, and we have exchanged views. We have expressed our position clearly, and that individual submissions by victims of Abiy Ahmed or Isaias Afwerki's campaign in Tigray cannot depict the real picture of what has happened in Tigray. What has happened in Tigray is a systematic violence, genocide that was meant to weed out an entire population, to rid Tigray of its own people. Economic facilities were destroyed with a vengeance. It's not, what has happened in Tigray, what has transpired in Tigray, the kind of crimes, heinous crimes that have been committed in Tigray are not just the sum total of individual crimes committed against individual Tigrayans. It's beyond that. It's beyond the sum total of the sufferings of individuals. One has to have a close look at what has transpired here, what has happened here, what was systematically undertaken by the Amhara expansionists, the Abiy government, and Isaias forces. Every factory is destroyed, not as a collateral damage, but because of a conscious decision. And we've told the experts it would be a miscarriage of justice if they allow Abiy Ahmed to stand in the way of their mission. They have to continue to put pressure on the government. People often complain that the time, in light of the fact that Tigray is in blockade, that they have, they are demanding individual submissions to be made through the internet is probably more outrageous than anything. I would have thought this was the least outrageous, because the kind of crimes that have been committed in Tigray are not just individual crimes committed against individuals, but crimes that were committed against an entire population, an entire infrastructure, and systematically so. And so it requires some kind of, so at least there is a clear understanding on their part that they would do everything in their power to I know they have extended the time for submission of, reports until the 21st of August. I don't know what that would amount to. But at least the international community is also more or less clear that they need to be on the ground to really understand how complex the situation is and how serious the crime has been. But one thing that came out of that meeting was that these people do not take the UN High Commissioner and Daniel Bakala's joint investigation seriously. I know that's not good enough, but at least there is a good indication that these people will not be taken for a ride by smart Alex in Addis Ababa. That I think is one positive aspect I think there is another question I was asked here, and whether there is room for optimism. Honestly, I'm hard pressed to find one good reason for optimism, but being optimistic doesn't hurt anyway. I mean, one has to be mindful of one's responsibility. As long as we don't let our cards down, we should always be ready to exploit whatever positive indication there is. But I'm hard pressed for any good enough reason for optimism. Whether Obasanjo has achieved anything, I think I have already responded to this. Honestly, the least problematic assignment could have been the release of prisoners of war. He didn't deliver. It's not because he lacked the commitment. It's simply because he didn't know who he was dealing with. So I'm not going to blame him for not securing the release of the prisoners. He has secured the release of prisoners from us. What he has failed to secure is their safety and security once they have crossed the line of control, our line of control to the line of control of the National Defense Forces. I'm not surprised that Abiy didn't reciprocate, because he never had the intention to reciprocate in the first place. Finally, with regard to Meles, yes, Meles is passing. Meles passed it 10 years ago. All I can say is the kind of achievements Meles made look easy have now proved to be probably the most intractable and the most difficult and the most elusive ones. Under a reformer prime minister whose knee-jerk reaction towards everything Meles has done was denigration and probably distraction, has landed the country in a situation that no person in their right mind could have imagined, not only 10 years ago, but even 6 years ago. I think that's the kind of yawning gulf Meles' absence has created in Ethiopia. And for those of us who always believed in his leadership, while his leadership is dearly missed, obviously people his detractors seem to realize how larger than life a figure he was. And at the very least, the kinds of things even Abiy Ahmed has now come to terms, come to adopt as his own, like the Renaissance Dam was the brainchild of Meles Zenawi. Although Abiy himself was saying all kinds of bad things about the Renaissance Dam. But for Meles, it wasn't just about the Renaissance Dam. Everything Ethiopia was famous for, the 20-something years of his reign, have all gone down the drain. And 10 years on, I ask myself whether he could have imagined it. In fact, in a way, he did imagine it. That in the event of some misguided individual taking the mantle of power, the country would go down the drain. And it is. It's very unfortunate. But Meles will continue to shine, whether he is accorded the kind of respect he deserves in Addis Ababa or elsewhere is absolutely immaterial, because Meles has, through his work, written his name, etched his name on steel, and it will remain so forever. Thank you.